Welcome everyone to OWL Cyber Defense and Tenable webinar, How to Securely Unify OT and IT with an Air-Gapped Architecture. My name is Mary Ann from OWL Cyber Defense and the moderator for today's webinar. Our presenters today are Mark Toussaint, OWL's Product Manager, Dennis Lanahan, OWL's Director of Sales, and Michael Rothschild, Senior Director of OT Solutions at Tenable. Our agenda for today is pros and cons of IT-OT convergence, how to unify IT and OT without introducing new threat vectors to air-gapped networks, best practices for securely transferring data out of an air-gapped network, and how to enable a secure process to centrally monitor an IT-OT environment. Now, a few things before we get started. Today's webinar will take roughly 30 minutes with 10 minutes of Q&A. We invite our attendees to type their questions in the chat box provided on the right side of your screen, and we will address your questions at the end of the presentation. You can also find a handout on the right side of your screen as well. This webinar is recorded, and you can expect an email within a few days, which will include a copy of the webinar and the Q&A for your reference. Thank you again for attending. Now let's get started. Take it away, Dennis.
Thank you for the introduction, Mary Ann. Welcome everybody in attendance today. Thank you for affording us your time and attention. Modern day industrial control, critical infrastructure organizations rely heavily on operational technology, the OT environment, to produce their goods and services. Beyond traditional IT operations that utilize servers, routers, PCs, and switches, these organizations also rely on OT systems such as programmable logic controllers, distributed control systems, and human interfaces to run their physical plants and factories. While OT devices have been in commercial use since the late 1960s, an analog to digital transformation has been taking place, changing the ways that we operate and interact with devices. This drives an increasing need to secure the OT environment. Modern day industrial operations often span complex IT and OT infrastructures. In a very standard environment, hundreds or even thousands of devices may exist and are increasingly being connected, called the Industrial Internet of Things. This creates new challenges in securing the industrial environments. Increased advancements of cybersecurity threats are more difficult to detect, investigate, and remediate. What has made this an even more challenging is that IT and OT have typically inhabited different parts of the organization, and with good reason. Up until only recently, the IT infrastructure played front and center in terms of ensuring complete visibility, security, and compliance. Mostly because this is where organizations were being attacked. For the better part of 2 decades, these were the things that kept the CISO up at night, but their reality has now changed. With our increasingly connected world, OT has quickly caught up as a lightning rod for new attacks and increased security concerns. Mary Ann, can I ask that you advance the slides, please? The IT and OT environments operate very differently. In general, IT people are used to working with the latest and greatest hardware and software, including the best security available to protect their networks. They tend to spend time patching, upgrading, and replacing systems. Meanwhile, OT staff are used to working with legacy technologies, many of which predate the internet era. These often use proprietary network protocols and lack the basic security controls like authentication or encryption. They also may not have event logs or audit trails. As a result, incident detection and response in an OT environment is very different than in an IT environment. Until recently, IT and OT security inhabited completely different spaces, and the ability to see into their environments was divided or limited, or may not have been allowed at all. Modern day attacks can be unknown and can travel across the traditional IT and OT security boundaries with intent and travel undetected. Our ability to track these types of propagation routes requires the de-siloing of traditional visibility parameters between IT and OT. Being able to gain a single view of IT and OT assets driven by the conversion that is taking place at the intersection of IT and OT. This single pane of glass convergence can help illuminate potential attack vectors, blind spots that may have eluded traditional security strategies. Although IT and OT convergence increases and centralizes visibility of the two networks, it also introduces new threat vectors to the OT network and increases the number of connections. Mark Toussaint will provide some insight into a few use cases of the OT and the IT boundary connections.
Thank you, Dennis. So, as a best practice, hands down, air gapping provides the most security. And it may sound simple, just disconnect OT from IT and call it a day. The reality or the problem of that is while air gapping may be ideal, it's just not practical for most businesses. Businesses need to be able to access OT data, whether that be for business analytics, threat detection, compliance reporting, maintenance scheduling, remote monitoring of alarms and events. The list goes on and on and on of types of data that need to come out of OT environments. And while it's a best practice to air gap, it's just not practical. So the question becomes, if an air gapped architecture is just not practical, how do we share data from OT to IT without introducing new threat vectors? How do you securely take advantage of the efficiencies that are gained by centralized monitoring when you have assets dispersed geographically across a wide area? So the use of data diodes provides businesses with a way to securely transfer that data one way from OT to IT, effectively ensuring that data only flows one way, ensuring that threats cannot enter back into the OT network. I'll talk a little more about data diodes and how they work later in the presentation, but now let's talk a little bit next about how diodes can be deployed to securely move Tenable vulnerability data from those OT networks to IT.
So Owl and Tenable have teamed their resources to provide an integrated solution that provides OT visibility data securely to the IT network. Our combined offering reduces the exposure to the OT network and increases the visibility of OT assets to the IT network, providing critical asset performance data in a secure and connected enterprise. The joint solution enables visibility of critical OT assets that may have been previously air-gapped from IT networks without introducing risks or threats. Tenable's OT data seamlessly flows through the Owl diode. The integrated solution makes it easy to configure and deploy network sensors in segments protected by the Owl diode. Owl's cross-domain data diode technology stops threats that looked across the network boundaries while allowing known and trusted data to flow. Tenable's advanced 360-degree visibility solution delivers both IT and OT updates to security systems and isolated networks. Next, Michael Rothschild, the Senior Director of OT Solutions at Tenable, will outline areas of concerns their customers have and what they care about most.
Great, thank you. So one of the things that we've seen across an OT network is the fact that there are a number of things that we need to deal with in the OT network. As we discussed earlier, as the folks from Owl mentioned, there are a lot more attacks that are now hitting the OT network. And these 5 key areas are areas that we'll get into in a little bit more detail. But what we've seen across OT environments and what keeps C-level executives up at night, security people up at night, compliance people up at night, and of course the engineering people up at night are these 5 areas. Do they have the appropriate visibility? Are they able to detect threats and mitigate them? Are they able to track all of the assets in their network? And in some cases, those assets can be over 10 years old. When vulnerabilities are announced, do we know about them and what do we do about them? And of course, be able to control our configurations. We'll talk more about this in a couple of minutes. But at the very basic level, we need to provide an appropriate amount of visibility across this new converged attack surface. And in some cases, the convergence is happening on purpose. There are teams that are converging their IT and OT operations. But in other instances, there can be the case of accidental convergence, where a team has no plan to converge their IT and OT environment, but unbeknownst to them, in fact, something has become converged. And in some cases, this can be as easy as a thumb drive walking into an OT environment. So at the most basic level, we can't control what we can't see. So it is important to have that full visibility across an entire converged attack surface. And in fact, in an OT environment, up to 20% of that OT environment can have IT types of products in that. Think about an HMI. That can be a laptop. Of course, we mentioned thumb drives just a couple of minutes ago. So the most important thing in the most basic level is to really have the ability to see across both IT and OT, in whether it's purposefully converged or not, on one attack surface.
Thank you for that introduction, Michael. We look forward to getting more details shortly. So how can organizations enable a secure process to make better decisions, providing the right data to make the right decisions at the right time, without introducing new threats, without adding new threat vectors to the networks, and allowing for the flow of secure data at the intersection of OT and the IT network boundary? Typically, companies turn to firewalls to allow communications between 2 networks. However, firewalls also introduce many risks. Firewalls compromise an air gap of the OT network, which in some organizations must comply with government regulations and maintain their air gap architecture. Firewalls are not the most secure method to transfer Tenable data out of the OT network to be monitored with IT data in one platform. The industry has many cybersecurity guidelines. Organizations such as the NRC, NERC, ISA, NIST, and many others provide guidance. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security issued guidance a few years ago focused on 7 strategies for securing industrial control systems. A few of the important guidelines provided from the DHS include: implement a one-way security architecture where and whenever possible. Isolate critical networks from external connections and reduce the number of network connections. Implement remote monitoring from critical networks without allowing remote access. Critical assets must be protected with limited or no access as possible, and deploy hardware-enforced deterministic cybersecurity, implementing data diode security whenever possible. Owl is a trusted leader in the cybersecurity space, providing our brand of cross-domain solutions and data diode technology to many governments, DoD, MOD, and critical infrastructure companies around the world. Tenable provides the visibility of critical asset performance data. Together, we offer a combined, secure, one-way transfer of Tenable data out of the OT network without introducing new threat vectors. The following portion of the webinar speaks to the details of how this combined solution works. First, we'll hear from Mark about the cross-domain and the data diode technology. Then Michael will provide a deeper insight to the Tenable asset visibility and security controls.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. So What is a diode? A diode is really an electronic component that physically allows current to flow in one direction, similar to a check valve in a plumbing system that only allows fluid to go in one direction. So a data diode is a hardware enforced electronic device which physically constrains the transfer of data to one way only. Most data diodes implement a separation or an air gap between source and destination network. And the way that works is you have a source network. It could be you're trying to do file transfer or move historian data or threat detection, databases, alarms and events, just a myriad of different industrial protocols. The OWL diode proxies those communications from the source network. We process the packets, and in doing that, we convert them into what's called an ATM cell, which is a protocol for moving large amounts of data over fiber optics. We strip out all routable information from that packet header and send that ATM packet across the data diode. Now, the source network has a send-only circuit. It is a photo transmitter that can only transmit light. On the destination network, there's a photo receiver that can only receive data from the send side. The packet is processed again, header information is reassembled in the packet, and then we route to the final destination. The important part is the diode is deterministic. It's hardware enforced, which is governed by the rules of physics. Light can only be sent from the source side. It can only be received on the destination side. There is no back channel for data to go backwards. So effectively, we're using that fiber to create what is effectively an air gap between a source, an OT, and an IT destination network. Next, please. Okay. So as I mentioned, the data diode is a hardware-based cybersecurity system or solution. It's designed to operate one way, which makes it impervious to software changes or attacks. It typically sits at the boundary of a source network, whether that be an OT network or an IIoT network, and enforces that unidirectional data flow, protecting or providing that security boundary in the source network, again, without producing threat vectors. The solutions are capable of transferring and protecting a wide variety of data types, whether it be historians like OSI Soft, Wonderware, file transfer, syslog data, SNMP, TCP streams, UDP, email, a wide range of industrial protocols like Modbus, OPC, IEC 104, DNP3. All of these data types can flow through an OWL data diode to enable that one-way unidirectional data flow out of the OT network. Okay, we'll segue over to Michael.
Great, thank you. So we started talking a little bit about on the OT environment, when we look specifically at an OT environment, about being able to have secured visibility, security, and control. So it sounds like a good MBA term, but what does that really mean? So in the next couple of slides, we'll talk about what it means to have visibility, security, and control across your environment. At the most basic level, we talked about being able to see your IT and OT devices in your environment today, but that's not enough. It's not enough to know that you have a laptop or that you have a programmable logic controller or an HMI or something else in an environment. But in order to truly understand what's happening in your OT environment, you need to not only know the model number and the manufacturer type of a specific asset, but we need to get deep information. One of the things we talked about earlier is, unlike an IT environment, which has a turnover maybe every 18 to 24 months in terms of getting new product in-house, in an OT environment, it's not uncommon to have PLCs and HMIs and DCSs that are as old as the plant, easily over a decade old. So it's very hard to secure stuff when you don't have basic information like what the patch level is, what's the firmware version, what users are logged in, what's happening on the backplane or ladder logic. So being able to really get detailed information, we call this situational analysis, really being able to understand what's happening in an environment. And in fact, in an OT environment, these assets are changing incredibly quickly. I think it was Mark that mentioned, now we have the industrial Internet of Things. So there are devices that are coming in and out of OT environments relatively frequently, and it's just not the best security practice, nor is it practical to have to update this manually. Really being able to get that situational awareness means to get deep information that it's updated on a regular basis. So that's really important to do. Now, one of the other things we need to be aware of is for those of you that have been in IT for years, if not decades, one of the things in IT is we want to detect and mitigate threats. And in fact, because the attack surface is increasing or changing, the fact that attack vectors are changing with convergence, with Industry 4.0 or IIoT, we need to be able to detect and mitigate threats in an OT environment accordingly. So how exactly do we do that? Well, one of the things that we're big proponents of is to use a hybrid engine or multi-detection methods to be able to see across your environment. On the left-hand side of the screen, one of the things we want to do is we want to passively monitor what's happening across the network. For those of you, again, in the IT environment, this is like an intrusion detection system, an intrusion prevention system, either IDS or IPS. Some of the things that we want to look for as we start to see things go across the network is what's happening from a policy perspective. Are there policies that are perhaps being violated, much like a firewall? Are we seeing anomalous events, which can be an indicator for zero-day or targeted attacks? These are things that we might not yet have policies for, and that is like an intrusion detection system or intrusion prevention system. And can we use third-party data? Is there an open source database that we can use similar to what Snort is on the IT side? Many of you may be familiar with something called Suricata, which is that open source signature database that can be used on the OT side. We want to see what's happening on the network that may indicate that an attack is happening, but that's not enough. In an OT environment, unlike an IT environment, in an OT environment, we can have devices that don't talk in the network. They're called dormant devices, and that can also be up to 20% of the environment. So we need to be able to do that deep active querying, much like I described on the earlier slide, to actually see what do I have in my network and what's happening in my network. This is information like backplane information, firmware data, ladder logic, etc. Because if you think about it, when an attack happens, most people don't attack a network. They attack the devices that are on the network. In fact, what you can only see on the network is a propagation of an attack. So we're big proponents of, when we talk about attack detection and mitigation, it's being able to use both of these methods, both seeing what's happening on the network as well as the devices that are in the network. So we talked a little bit about visibility. We talk about being able to detect your assets and see what's happening, or asset inventory. We talked a little bit about attack detection and mitigation. And with all of this great information about the devices that are in your network, we can start to track and prioritize vulnerabilities that are specific to your network. Now I'm going to use some math here to talk a little bit about vulnerabilities. In 2019, there were over 20,000 vulnerabilities that were disclosed. But this number seems daunting. Imagine if you had to patch 20,000 vulnerabilities in your environment. Well, if you start to look at the numbers, less than 50% of those vulnerabilities actually had an exploit available to it. So wouldn't it make sense to prioritize those vulnerabilities that actually have an exploit? Well, to make those numbers even less, 3% of that 50%, or 3% of 10,000, actually had a targeted vulnerability associated with it, specific to a network. So now we have a much more manageable number than the 20,000. We just chopped it down to half of that by saying, these are the ones with exploits, and 3% are those that are targeted. So one of the things that we need to think about when we talk about stopping the vulnerabilities in an OT environment is those that are targeted. And that's one of the things that we're big proponents of also. Deal with the vulnerabilities in a triaged or prioritized fashion based on the ones that have exploits, based on the ones that are targeted. And now we have a much more manageable number. And the fifth part and the final part that I want to talk about is about your PLCs or your DCSs. These are the brains, right? This is everything that operates an OT environment. It's much like a server in an IT environment. This is the thing that controls the robot that builds your car, or the mechanism that delivers electricity to your home, or the devices that are manufactured like ventilators to help with COVID patients. Everything is dependent on the PLC or the DCS. And it's important for us to know when changes are made to those controllers. One of the things that we have to think about is, in some cases, those controllers, there should be changes that are made. New model your car, new process, changes to the environment that actually builds things like the assembly line. Those things should happen. But in some cases, changes to PLCs should not happen. It can be, for instance, an administrator that puts in wrong details to it. It can be a malware attack that says speed up this process by 700%. Those are all bad things. So the fifth and final area that we want to think about in an OT environment is to be able to control configurations. And what that does is that it actually takes snapshots. Every time a change is made to a PLC, it takes a snapshot. So now, if something should go wrong, you'll have the paper trail, you'll have the information to be able to track back to last known good state. And this will help you in your environment ensure that whenever a change is made to a PLC, that change is warranted and makes sense. And if it isn't, it allows you to dial back to last known good state.
Well, Michael, thank you for that in-depth understanding of the Tenable product line. For the delegates on the call, Owl and Tenable, thank you for your time and attention today. We set out to provide some insights about how your separated OT and IT networks can be connected together securely to allow the exchange of data needed to run your business. Tenable offers the ability to gain situational awareness on every asset. As you learn, Tenable provides the services for you to identify, discover, classify, collect, and track your OT assets performance. Combined with Owl's cross-domain capability secured with hardware-enforced data diode technology that allows for the secure and trusted data flows required to enable your connected enterprise. We'll now take some time to answer a few questions from the participants. If we don't have time to get to all the questions during this session, we'll provide a list of the questions and the answers to all the participants. Mary Ann, do you have a first question from the audience for us?
Hi, Dennis. Yes, thank you. I have a question for Michael. With the onset of COVID, how has it impacted your customers?
Yeah, good question. So the environment has actually changed pretty substantially. One of the things that's interesting about an OT environment is that it's impossible to do it virtual, right? Imagine being able to run a power plant from your den. It's very hard to do. So while we've seen some people be able to work from home, the bulk of critical infrastructure has had to work on site. Now, having said that, 30–40% of people can work from home. And one of the questions that we're getting on a pretty regular basis and concerns is what happens when these people come back into a secured environment, meaning they've brought their laptops, their tablets, their third-party devices home. And the question really becomes, well, are they bringing something back into their environment, into the environment? So when they plug in, there could be essentially an attack that starts on the IT side that propagates to OT and these types of things. So we're seeing a lot of, what happens next post-COVID? How do we, ensure the fact that people don't bring bad things into the network. And that's something that I think the joint solution really answers kind of squarely in that sweet spot. There's a lot we can do to stop those things from happening, ensure people can work from home, and when they come back, be able to do it securely.
Great, thank you so much. This one is for Mark. What protocols are being used to transfer the Tenable Sensa data?
Okay, the OWL integration with Tenable utilizes just a standard TCP streaming connection, which is a standard offering in the OWL data diodes. And Michael raises a good point about with COVID and everybody working at home. Another question becomes, how do we securely transfer that Tenable data to an IT network or to the cloud so that my work at home employees can have access to that data in real time? So that the OWL data diode provides that level of security to ensure that we can get all this valuable data out of the OT network without allowing any vulnerabilities back into that network.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Looks like we have one for Dennis here. Do I need a data diode in OT and one in IT to send and receive the data?
Yeah, great question there. As Mark indicated earlier in his slides, the OWL solution connects both the source OT network and the destination IT network in the same product. So a single solution allows the connection of both of those networks and enforces that one-way data diode transfer within a single solution.
Okay, thank you again for that. Next question for Michael. Is the Tenable product modular?
Yeah, so the good news is you get everything in one package. One of the things that we really envisage the Tenable product to be is a tool. It's being able to be completely flexible. So if you want to take advantage of certain features but not others, you can do that. But the administrator has the capabilities of turning things on, off, and being able to flip the virtual levers and dials. We believe in forward compatibility. So we put everything in one product, but we also give the customer the freedom and using their expertise to see what they'd like to turn on and leave off and perhaps use somewhere later down the road.
Okay, one more. Data diode is recommended to be after firewall on outside from client sender location. Who would like to address that one? Maybe
I can take that one.
Great, thank you.
Dennis, I'll add to that. Right. So typically in most environments, our clients have implemented a DMZ or a level 3.5 for that separation between IT and OT. The data diodes that get deployed typically get deployed within that DMZ. And part of the guidance may be to keep the firewalls that currently make up your DMZ, because the firewalls do add a level of protection. So the other way to answer that question is depending on the network that you're trying to protect. So in this case, trying to protect the OT environment, the firewall would typically be on the outside as that outlet from OT to IT. And in many cases, our customers deploy a firewall on the outside, the IT environment, to protect the data diode from any other outside influence or any possible connection that an adversary might try to make to the data diode. So the architecture can certainly be very flexible, and we can help review any architecture requirements based on the security needs that you're looking to implement.
And just to add on to Dennis, we advocate for defense in depth. So, many of our customers will choose to leave those firewalls in place. Some customers remove them because there are, less things to manage. But in most instances, we recommend that defense in depth, and we'd leave the firewalls there and place the diode in between.
Okay, and just to be conscious of time, we'll just have one more question. And as Dennis mentioned, every other question that we did not address will be addressed through the email we'll send after the webinar. So this final question, I believe, will be for Mike, possibly. How does Tenable work with legacy devices?
Okay, so I'm assuming that they're talking about legacy PLCs, perhaps. The truth of the matter is that we have a long list of PLCs that we cover, and some of them are extremely old. You know, as we mentioned at the outset of the webinar, PLCs have been around since the 60s. It's not a new concept, and we see in many environments the devices being extremely old. I mentioned, you know, easily a decade or more, and we do support them. So I'd say that by definition, we have to support legacy devices, and we do, because these environments are legacy. But every environment is different. So I can't say hand on heart we support any specific type of environment, but we can certainly take it offline and communicate with the person that asked that question to see if we support their specific environment. The vast majority we do, though.
That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. We are out of time now. I just want to thank everyone for attending. If you happen to have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out using one of our follow-up emails coming up after this webinar, or you can use the chat bots found on both OWL and Tenable's website. Thank you again for attending. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye now.